Do you have stacks of 12 by 12 paper you need to make a dent in? Let's craft a stack together today. Hi, I'm Jess from jesscrafts.com, and I'm going to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get started. Today, I started with a pack of patterned paper from Michaels. I believe it's called Garden Blue Specialty Paper. They have a couple of different options available, and it comes with some solid cardstock, some foil cardstock, and some pattern paper. There are 25 sheets inside the stack, but I'm just going to use the pattern paper and the solid cardstock. So I'm only going to be using 15 of the 25 sheets today. I'm going to use the 10 sheets of pattern paper without making any pattern paper scraps. I pulled out a couple of my favorite 12 by 12 templates from jesscrafts.com, and I'm going to cut each paper. So I'm going to cut one sheet of yellow and one sheet of flower paper to the measurements specified in each template. And that way I can mix them up. So because I've cut both the flower paper and the stripe paper to the same template, I will get to make 12 cards because each template makes 6 cards, but I've done it twice. And I'll be able to mix and match the patterns. So I'm not going to show you the cutting of every single thing because the templates are available to download and they tell you exactly how to cut all of that. I'm going to try to focus a little bit more on design and process and all that kind of thing that I think will be a bit more helpful. And of course, you do this with whatever pattern paper you need to use up. So I'm starting with template number 3 and I'm showing you how I kit it up here. I cut the pattern paper down to the specified sizes, and then this one calls for you to cut a circle out of the pattern paper, and you're going to use that pattern paper circle you cut. So it's important that you cut a circle of pattern that you like, and also that you cut it in the place that you're going to place it when the card is finished. So if you want to mix up the sketch and use the circle towards the top or something, then you're going to want to make sure you cut it out at the top. I use the solid cardstock from the kit as my mats. So you can see here inside of these envelopes that I picked up at Amazon, I have all of my pattern paper pieces and my cardstock mats cut out. Then I printed some designs that I liked from Creative Fabrica and a Etsy shop called Rivus Art. And those will also be linked in the video description below. But my thought process there is if I'm going to be making a bunch of cards, and I really am going to make a bunch because I'm going to make 12 from each sheet of paper, 6 from each sheet of paper, and I'm using 10 paper, so 60 cards. Cutting and coloring 60 little images is taking a long time. So instead, I opted to just cut 60 images. And I'll show you them as I use them throughout, but I like that option of being able to save some time. Also here, when I kit things up like this by putting all of the pre-cut pieces in these envelopes, it allows me to work on them in a more systematic way, and it allows me to work at them outside of my craft room. So I've heard people asking things like, if you're traveling, you're going to spend a long time in a car, like what can you do crafty-wise? I think this is a pretty good option just because you basically kind of just need your adhesive at this point. You don't need to be worried about cutting anything while you're moving. And so if you had like a little lap desk or something, I think you could make it work. This is sketch number 3. This is where the circle's cut out. I like to draw just a little bit of attention to that because it's a little bit trickier than some of my other sketches, which are more just kind of like cut and assemble. But this, you need to be a little bit more aware. So when you cut the circle out, I like to use a stitch circle die for a little bit of interest, but literally any circle die will do. And I really do think circle dies are a great one to add to your stash if you don't have it. Rectangle dies, square dies, you can cut a lot of those on your own, but cutting a circle, which of course you can do with a protractor, I don't remember what it's called. There's a fancy tool you could do it with, and draw a circle and all that, but I would much rather have dies. They're one of the, I think, even if maybe you only craft for Christmas or something, I think it's totally worth it to have circle dies. I'm going to tape the paper to the back. The back doesn't get a mat because it already has that nice 1/4-inch border on the A2 size card. All of these are A2 size cards. I do have templates for other size cards, Slimline 5x7. So if you like something else, you can find templates at jesscrafts.com, but these are A2. And then I'm going to place the strip across the circle because I'm going to have to cover up this circle so it doesn't look like there's a hole in my paper. Now, the mat helps this a lot because I don't have to lay it exactly over the place that I cut it. I can instead shift it around just a little bit because I have that extra 1/4 inch from the mat. I don't worry if my circles are exactly a 1/4 inch bigger. I just take a set of stacked circle dies miner from MFT and I just pick the next size bigger, and usually it's close enough. But if you were measuring them some other way, and always, of course, choose whatever size cardstock border you like. For the most part, I use 1/4 inch, but 1/8 inch works out pretty well too. I'm going to decide which of my already pre-cut images I like on this card, and then I've made one of each set. So because I've cut the yellow paper and the floral paper for this, I'm making 6 of each card. And when I decide which one I like, then I take so I've decided I'm going to put the boy bunny on the cards that is primarily yellow stripe and the girl bunny on the florals. So then I take 6, an additional 5 because I've made one of each. I'm going to take an additional 5 and then I'm going to add that to my kit. And I'm going to pop these up just a little bit. Normally you could use foam tape for that, but as I mentioned before, I think anyway, that I like to use doubled up cardstock. So I take extra bits of high quality thick cardstock that I have and I tape them together, and then I put that behind my images to give them just a little bit of dimension. Or I take leftover like cardboard scraps that I get in packaging and use that. I'm going to move on to template number 4. Again, I'm going to make 12 of these, 6 of each. One will have the yellow stripe as the focal point, and then it will have the floral in the background, and the other will be the opposite. When I cut the cardstock mat, I only use in this sketch, I only use a cardstock mat for that 3 by 4 inch rectangle that goes in the center as the focal point. And then the triangles get butted up against the side of the card, so they don't need them. But because I knew I would be covering up most of the surface of the mat, I could cut the circles for the previous card out of the center. So that's why there's a giant circle in all of my mats. It's just me trying to get a little bit more out of the small amount of purple cardstock that came in this particular pattern paper pack. I was not able to get all of the mats that I needed for my 60 cards from the 5 sheets of 12 by 12 paper. That is at least in part due to the fact that at one point I mismeasured and I cut 2 sheets of the purple paper to the wrong size mat for the card I was trying to. And so luckily I had other similar purple cardstock in my stash. And luckily it wasn't the pattern paper, because if I cut that wrong, I wouldn't have any extra. But just a heads up, you might be able to get all of them out of that. I just don't know because I messed up. So I just wanted to be upfront with that. If you see that there's a slightly different purple later on in the video, that's why. When I kitted this up, I cut all those 3 by 4 pieces on the diagonal to create the triangles that go in the background. A little bit of a challenge is that you probably want to use the triangles that were cut from each other. So like you want to use one rectangle cut in half so that the pattern would line up, but you don't really have to. So if you're using it as a kit and you just want to be really quick, then don't worry about making sure that the 2 halves of the triangle would match up. Just use whichever 2 you like. But just something that I wanted to point out, because I could see that being a point of frustration if you kind of separate, or you kind of just threw them all together into one of those poly envelopes and then you're like, oh wait, now I have to go back and match them all. I'm using a little bit of extra glue at the very tips of the triangle because while my ATG holds really well, it's really hard to get it in the like little tiny points at the end. And so I like liquid glue for that. Barely Arts is my liquid glue of choice. There's a little blue thing at the top of the screen, and that is my Barely Art. Well, it's not from Barely Art. It holds my Barely Art glue, but it's a glue lounger from Make It by Marco. And I am not remembering to put my glue back in it right now, but I like it because it keeps your glue leaning on an angle such that the glue is always at the tip. And when you're working on a couple pieces, you don't have to keep putting the glue back in. It'll kind of stay flowing, but I like it as a storage solution because I find that if I store my glue not up, like slightly upside down, then it's not really ready to go when I want to use it, and it could make like a glue splat because like you'll go to squeeze it out and there's air trapped in it and it splurts everywhere. Not a big fan of that. So I think that Glue Lounger is quite helpful. I'm going to add some little sentiments to this card. The first set of cards I actually didn't add a sentiment to. I think that these are great Easter cards, but I'm not going to make them have to be Easter cards. I'm not going to put Happy Easter on any of them. I'm probably going to send some for Easter or give them away for Easter, but I'm not going to put that on there because it gives me more versatility that I can use them all spring long, and I can donate them easier because a lot of organizations, they'll get cards that are holiday specific, but they won't get as many cards that are more general. And so this way, the organizations can use them all spring long as well. I have an MFT die that cuts 3 little rectangles. They're very simple, plain rectangles, but it does cut 3 at one time, and it looks just a little more finished than doing it myself. And I actually find it difficult to cut perfectly straight, thin rectangles like this on my cutter. So I have die cut these, but of course you could just cut it from the pattern paper, and you could use banner dies if you like to. They would give you a little bit more of a fancy finish, but I like these because I can cut 3 at one time. Now, if you had 3 different banner dies that were all about the same, you could use those. I'm going to stamp my sentiment from a Simon Says Stamp Tiny Words. I believe it's called Tiny Words Encouragement. There's a couple different themed ones out there. And it just says, have a great day. I know it's a little hard to see here, but it is quite readable in real life, I guess, when you see the cards in person. That's kind of what I want to say. I did stamp them tone on tone because I wanted the sentiment to be subtle and really let that little duckling stand out and be the focal point of the card. But I did stamp it on a scrap just to make sure it was going to be readable to the recipient. And again, popping them up with some fake foam tape. My next sketch is 12 by 12 template number 6. I'm going to use templates number 6 and 7. 6 and 7 are very, very similar. The difference is that I designed 6, template number 6, to work with 12 by 12 pieces of pattern paper that had 3 by 4 cut aparts, just because those are so popular. I wanted to make sure that I was sharing some ideas with it. However, 7 is essentially a simplified version that uses, instead of the 3 by 4s, a slightly larger rectangle. Now, I could probably just use template number 7 here and it would go much faster, but I did want to pick out 5 templates in all. And I liked how this little extra strip that you create by cutting down to 3 by 4 instead of the larger size gives a nice little grounding point for either you can put your sentiment on it or you can use it for your image, which I'll show you later. So the striped paper, when I cut it, and I had the little 1/2 inch by 2 inch strip, it had a little bit of a white in every single one of them. And I thought, well, that's just perfect for a sentiment. So I'm just going to stamp my Have a Great Day sentiment that I already picked out in the same purple ink that I already picked out and let that be. But then the floral paper, I did not think the sentiment would be very readable. So I'm just going to skip a sentiment on that again because it helps to make the card more general. You could totally add some other kind of sentiment somewhere else. If you were using a pattern paper that was less busy, kind of like the stripes are, it would totally work out fine. But most pattern papers are kind of difficult to stamp a sentiment on. So I'm going to show you what I would do if I didn't want to stamp a sentiment on some of these cards. Every example that I'm showing you here, I'm going to show you, like I said, 5 examples for the 5 templates. I'm going to show you one of each card because I've cut 2 of each template from the 2 different pattern papers. And I just want to show you what each combination looks like because I'm going to make very slightly different design choices sometimes depending on which is the more prominent color in the design. So, like for instance, when I use that girl and boy bunny set, I am going to use the boy bunnies on papers that have more yellow because I think that's just a little bit more gender neutral. And then I'm going to use the girl bunnies on where the floral is more prominent. I'm forgetting sometimes to put the sketch in the corner. However, if you go to my blog, which will be linked in the video description, it will be a blog post that's pretty organized in terms of showing you, okay, here is the card, here's the template that I used to make the card, and I'll actually show you a picture of all 12 of the finished cards because I'm not showing that in the video just in case you're curious how all of them turned out, but they're going to be pretty much exactly the same. And so it'll be like much more concise there, and you'll also be able to, once you get to jesscrafts.com, you'll be able to find all those other size templates in case this is the first time you found them. With that little doggy, he is from an Etsy shop called Rivus Art. I would recommend checking them out because they have a lot of really cute images. And I'm gonna put it off to the side when there's a sentiment, and then when there's no sentiment, I'm gonna put the puppy directly on top of that little strip so that it acts as a good grounding for him. And that's what I would do for any busier pattern papers. I used a little bit of cardboard scrap to pop him up. You could, of course, absolutely use foam tape. I will say if you are traveling and trying to create, foam tape would probably be a little bit easier. It's a little bit more fussy to use cardstock scraps and that kind of thing as your foam tape because you need to add adhesive to them. So just something to consider if you're using this as more of an on-the-go crafting project. I will also link those Polly pockets that I use. That reminded me of the Polly Pocket toys. I mean, like, Polly's the material. Anyway, those plastic pockets that I use, I will link those in case you're interested because I do find them to be quite useful and they hold everything pretty securely. I haven't ever really found anything to fall out even as I'm moving them around. Again, I'm going to create a card with the yellow stripe as the focal point and then the floral as a focal point. This is the Simplified sketch, sketch number 7. This one has a lot of room for you to add whatever your focal image is going to be. So I think you could go with a much larger focal image. These bunnies, I chose to print them out and cut them out quite small. That is the other thing about picking images from Etsy or Creative Fabrica, which I will link because I'm an affiliate there. I'm not an affiliate on Etsy, but I just liked the Etsy designs and I'll use things from wherever I like them. And I'm not, just so you know. But anyway, I like those because you can resize them. So if you need a really small image, you can use the same one really small on one card and really large on another card. Now, to save myself some time, I did kind of just pick something to use. I stamped a Happy Spring from a Lawn Fawn set there, again, to keep it neutral. It's a little bit more specific because you'd have to use it at springtime, but I think these are pretty distinctly spring cards, so I didn't think it was too restrictive to put a Happy Spring there. And they also fit on the same MFT label die, so I was able to die cut a whole bunch at one time. This is template number 9. In the original template, it asks you to mat that back. It's not quite a square, but the square-ish looking piece. It tells you to put a mat on it. That's a 1/4 inch, and then it will go right to the edges of the card. But because I was already running low on the purple cardstock, I decided to just skip that mat and show you that as an alternative because I think this looks fine too. Although this pattern paper does have a lot of white in the background, so it certainly stands out less. You could totally use colored cardstock for your cards instead. I just chose to use white, in part because white is the cheapest cardstock you can get most of the time. And yeah, so I just skipped that background piece there. You can add it or take it out, whatever you like. Then there is a little strip that goes most of the way towards the bottom across that large piece, and then a little tiny rectangle, which is the perfect size for many, many stamped images. And I find that a lot of the different stamps in my collection, when they make like critter stamps and all that, it's just about the right size for those, and you can even squeeze a sentiment onto it usually if you want. So that was kind of the inspiration behind choosing that size as my focal point. Now, of course, I'm not using stamped images I'm instead using images that I sized to approximately the same size so that they would also fit well there. In the sketch, I placed it on the left side. But as I was assembling the cards and I just kind of got in the groove, sometimes I actually place them on the right, and I think both work fine, so you do whichever side you like. And in general, always feel free to change my sketches to whatever way you like to assemble your cards. I'm just providing you an example sketch for those cut pieces. And if you cut the pieces exactly like I do, then you're left with no scraps for that size of pattern paper. But if you like something different, or you don't have the same exact size of pattern paper, of course you can modify everything. I know it can be really helpful to just use a bunch of pattern paper and really enjoy your card making when you don't have to think about every little cut you're making or all the design, and you can instead make choices about color and pattern and focus on coloring cute stamps and all that. If you found this video inspiring, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community, subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.